Hello. Today we will start a new series. Here we will start modern history, a brief history of modern India written by Rajiv Ahir, IPS, which is the most preferred book by toppers. So the first, the initial two chapters are not much relevant to the UPSC exam. So we will start with Unit 2, Chapter 3, Advent of Europeans in India. Unit 2 is Advent of Europeans and Consolidation of British Power in India. Okay. Chapter 3, Advent of Europeans in India. We will discuss or we will learn about the Portuguese in India, the quest for and discovery of a sea route to India, from trading to ruling, Portuguese state, Portuguese laws, favor with Mughals, decline of the Portuguese, significance of the Portuguese. Then next, the Dutch settlements, Anglo-Dutch rivalry, decline of the Dutch in India. Then the English, Charter of Queen Elizabeth I, progress of English Company, then the French, foundation of French centers in India, the Anglo-French struggle for supremacy, the Carnatic Wars, causes for the English success and French failure, then the Danes. Okay, then why the English succeeded against other European powers? Because of structure and nature of the trading companies, naval superiority, industrial revolution, military skill and discipline, stable government, lesser zeal for religion, use of debt market. Okay. Then in summary, okay, summary and boxes, Portuguese rise and fall, formative years of the East India Company, rise and fall of duplics in India, about the goods in trade initially. Okay, so we will discuss the chapter 3, Advent of the Europeans in India. Though we talk of ancient, medieval, and modern periods, in history, history is a continuity. It is not always easy to distinguish clearly when one period ends and another begins. So, if we think of the history of modern India as beginning with the advent of the Europeans, we need to go back to what is generally considered the medieval period, that is, the 15th century itself, indeed, to a time even before the Mughals came and established their empire. Okay, the Portuguese in India, the quest for and discovery of a sea route to India. After the decline of Roman Empire in the 7th century, the Arabs had established their domination in Egypt and Persia. Direct contact with the Europeans, direct contact between the Europeans and India declined, and with that the easy accessibility to the Indian commodities like spices, calicos, silk, and various precious stones that were greatly in demand was affected. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks, who were on the ascendant. Merchandise from India went to the European markets through Arab Muslim intermediaries. Arab Muslim intermediaries. Okay. The Red Sea trade route was a state monopoly from which Islamic rulers earned tremendous revenues. The land routes to India were also controlled by the Arabs. In these circumstances, the Europeans were keen to find a direct sea route to India. 15th century Europe was gripped by the spirit of Renaissance with its call for exploration. At the same time, Europe made great advances in the art of shipmaking and shipbuilding and navigation. Hence, there was an eagerness all over Europe for adventurous sea voyages to reach the unknown corners of the East. The economic development of many regions of Europe was also progressing rapidly with the expansion of land under cultivation, the introduction of improved plow, scientific crop management such as crop rotation, and increased supply of meat, which called for spices for cooking as well as for preservation. Prosperity also grew, and with it, the demand for Oriental luxury goods also increased. Venice and Geneva, which had earlier prospered through trade in Oriental goods, were too small to take on the mighty Ottoman Turks or to take up major exploration on their own. The North Europeans were ready to aid Portugal and Spain with money and men. even as the Genoese were ready to provide ships and technical knowledge. It is also to be noted that Portugal had assumed the leadership of Christendom's resistance to Islam, even as it had taken on itself the spirit of exploration that had characterized the Genoese. Historians have observed that the idea of finding an ocean route to India had become an obsession for Prince Henry of Portugal, who was nicknamed as the Navigator. Also, he was keen to find a way to circumvent the Muslim domination of the Eastern Mediterranean, and all the routes that connected India to Europe. Pope Nicholas V gave Prince Henry a bull in 1454. Pope Nicholas V gave Prince Henry a bull in 1454, conferring on him the right to navigate the sea to the distant shores of the Orient, most specifically as far as India, in an attempt to fight Islamic influence and spread Christian faith. However, Prince Henry died before his dream could become a reality. In 1497, under the Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494, in 1494, under the Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494, the rulers of Portugal and Spain divided the non Christian world between them by an imaginary line in the Atlantic, some 1300 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Under the treaty, Portugal could claim and occupy everything to the east of the line, while Spain could claim everything to the west. The situation was thus prepared for the Portuguese incursions into the waters around India. It was in 1487 that Portuguese navigator Bartholomew Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope in Africa and sailed up the eastern coast. He was well convinced that the long sought after sea route to India had been found. But it was only 10 years later that an expedition of Portuguese ships set out for India in 1497 and arrived in India in slightly less than 11 months' time in May 1498. Okay. From trading to ruling, Vasco da Gama. From trading to ruling, Vasco da Gama. The arrival of three ships under Vasco da Gama, led by Gujarati pilot named Abdul Majid at Calicut in May 1498, profoundly affected the course of Indian history. The Hindu ruler of Calicut, the Zamorin, Samudri, however, had no apprehensions as to the Europeans' intentions, as the prosperity of his kingdom was due to Calicut's position as an entry port. He accorded a friendly reception to the Vasco da Gama. The Arab traders who had a good business on Malabar coast were apprehensive and were not keen on the Portuguese getting a hold there. For centuries, the trading system in the Indian Ocean had numerous participants: Indians, Arabs, Africans from the East Coast, Chinese, Javanese, among others. But these participants had acted according to some tacit rules of conduct, and none had sought overwhelming dominance, though all were in it for profit. The Portuguese changed that. They wanted to monopolize the hugely profitable Eastern trade by excluding competitors, especially the Arabs. Vasco da Gama stayed in India for 3 months. When he returned to Portugal, he carried back with him a rich cargo and sold the merchandise in the European market at a huge profit. The importance of the direct access to the pepper trade was made clear by the fact that elsewhere the Europeans who had to buy through Muslim middlemen would have had to spend 10 times as much for the same amount of pepper. Not surprisingly, other profit seeking merchants of European nations were tempted to come to India and trade directly. A voyage was undertaken by Pedro Alvarez Cabral. First one is Vasco da Gama, next one is Pedro Alvarez Cabral, to trade for spices. He negotiated and established a factory at Calicut, where he arrived in September 1500. There was an incident of conflict when the Portuguese factory at Calicut was attacked by the locals. resulting in the death of several Portuguese. In retaliation, Cabral seized a number of Arab merchant ships anchored in the harbor and killed hundreds of their crew, besides confiscating their cargo and burning the ships. Calicut was bombarded by Cabral. Cabral's full name is Pedro Alvarez Cabral. Later, Cabral succeeded in making advantageous treaties with the local rulers of Cochin and Kannur. Vasco da Gama once again came to India in 1501. The Zamorin declined to exclude Arab merchants in favor of the Portuguese when Vasco da Gama combined commercial greed with ferocious hostility and wreaked vengeance on Arab shipping wherever he could. His rupture with the Zamorin thus became total and complete. Vasco da Gama set up trading factory at Kannur. Gradually, Calicut, Kannur, and Cochin became the important trade centers of the Portuguese. Gradually, under the pretext of protecting the factories and their trading activities, the Portuguese got permission to fortify these centers. Okay. View. The landing of Vasco da Gama at Calicut in 1498 is generally regarded as the beginning of a new era in the world history, especially in the relationship between Asia and Europe. Although Asia and Europe had been in commercial relations with each other since antiquity, the opening of the direct sea relations between the two was not only the fulfillment of an old dream, according to Greek historian Herodotus. The Phoenicians had rounded Africa in the 6th century BC. It presaged big increase of trade between the two. This, however, was only one of the objectives of Portuguese. For the Portuguese, the opening of a new sea route to India would give a big blow to the Muslims, the Arabs, and the Turks, who were the traditional enemies of Christianity and were posing a new threat to Europe by virtue of the growing military and naval power of the Turks. A direct sea link with India would displace the virtual monopoly of the Arabs and Turks over the trade in Eastern goods, especially spices. They also vaguely hoped by the exploration of Africa, they would be able to link up with the kingdom of legendary Prester John, also called Pres- Presbyter John or John the Elder, believed to have been a Christian ruler of the East and popularized as such in medieval chronicles of the West, and be in a position to attack the Muslims from two sides. Thus, the commercial and religious objectives supported and justified each other. Okay. Next one is after Cabral. Next one is Francisco de Almeida. After Cabral, next one is Francisco de Almeida. In 1505, the King of Portugal appointed a governor in India for a 3-year term and equipped the incumbent with sufficient force to protect the Portuguese interests. For Francisco de Almeida, the newly appointed governor was asked to consolidate the position of the Portuguese in India and destroy Muslim trade by seizing Aden, Ormuz, and Malacca. Destroy Muslim trade by seizing Aden, Ormuz, and Malacca. He was also advised to build fortresses at Anjadiva, Cochin, Kannur, and Kilwa. Okay, what Almeida, however, encountered along with opposition of the Zamorin was a threat from Mamluk Sultan of Egypt. Encouraged by the merchants of Venice, whose lucrative commerce was now at risk due to the Portuguese interference, the Egyptians raised a fleet in the Red Sea to stop the advances of Portuguese. In 1507, the Portuguese squadron was defeated in a naval battle of Diu by the combined Egyptian and Gujarat navies, and Almeida's son was killed. Next year, Almeida avenged his defeat by totally crushing the two navies. Almeida's vision was to make the Portuguese the master of Indian Ocean. His policy was known as the Blue Water Policy or Cartay's system. Cartay's system. Okay. View. As long as you may be powerful at sea, you will hold India as yours. And if you do not possess this power, little will avail you a fortress on shore. Francisco de Almeida. Okay. After Almeida, next one was Alfonso de Albuquerque. Alfonso de Albuquerque. Albuquerque, who succeeded Almeida as the Portuguese governor in India, was the real founder of Portuguese power in East, a task he completed before his death. So, who was the real founder of Portuguese power in the East? It was Alfonso de Albuquerque. He secured for Portugal the strategic control of the Indian Ocean by establishing bases overlooking all the entrances to the sea. There were Portuguese strongholds in East Africa of the Red Sea at Ormuz, in Malabar, and at Malacca. The Portuguese, under Albuquerque, bolstered their stranglehold by introducing a permit system for other ships and exercising control over the major shipbuilding centers in the region. The non availability of timber in the Gulf and Red Sea regions for shipbuilding also helped the Portuguese in their objectives. Albuquerque acquired Goa from Sultan of Bijapur in 1510 with ease. The principal port of Sultan of Bijapur became the first bit of Indian territory to be under the Europeans since the time of Alexander the Great. An interesting feature of his rule was the abolition of Sati. So, who abolished the Sati system? It was Alfonso de Albuquerque. Okay. View. Bitter persecution of Muslims was one serious drawback of Albuquerque's policy. This could have been due to his resolve to further the interest of his countrymen by complete extension of Muslim commercial interest in the East. During his rule, Albuquerque did his best to strengthen the fortifications of Goa and enhance its commercial importance. In order to secure a permanent Portuguese population in India, he encouraged his men to take Indian wives. Okay. The Portuguese men who had come on the voyages and stayed back in India were, from Albuquerque's day, encouraged to take local wives. In Goa and the province of North, they established themselves as village lords, landlords, often building new roads and irrigation works, introducing new crops like tobacco and cashew nut, or better plantation varieties of coconut. Besides planting large groves of coconut to meet the need for coir rigging and cordage. In the cities, they settled as artisans and master craftsmen, besides being traders. Most of such Portuguese came to look upon their new settlements rather than Portugal as home. After Albuquerque, next one is Ninoda Kunha. Ninoda Kunha. Ninoda Kunha assumed office of the governor of Portuguese interest in India in November 1529, and almost 1 year later shifted the headquarters of the Portuguese government in India from Cochin to Goa. Cochin to Goa. Bahadur Shah of Gujarat, during his conflict with the Mughal Emperor Humayun, secured help from the Portuguese by ceding to them in 1534 the island of Bassein with its dependencies and revenues. He also promised them a base in Diu. However, Bahadur Shah's relations with the Portuguese became sore when Humayun withdrew from Gujarat in 1536. Okay, 34, 36. Since the inhabitants of the town started fighting with the Portuguese, Bahadur Shah wanted to raise a wall of partition. Opposing this, the Portuguese started negotiations, in the course of which the ruler of Gujarat was invited to a Portuguese ship and killed in 1537. Okay, right after the Humayun withdrew from Gujarat in 1536. Okay, Ninoda Kunha was also attempted to increase Portuguese influence in Bengal by settling many Portuguese nationals there with Hooghly as their headquarters. Okay, favorable conditions for Portuguese in India, accepting Gujarat, which was ruled by the powerful Mahmud Begarha or Begada from 1458 to 1511. The northern part was much divided among many small powers. In the Deccan, the Bahmani kingdom was breaking up into smaller kingdoms. None of the powers had a navy worth its name, nor did they think of developing their naval strength. In the Far East, the imperial decree of the Chinese emperor limited the navigational reach of the Chinese ships. As regards the Arab merchants and ship owners who until then dominated the Indian ocean trade, they had nothing to match the organization and unity of the Portuguese. Moreover, the Portuguese had cannons placed on their ships. Okay, Portuguese state. The general tendency is to underestimate the Portuguese hold in India. However, the Estado Portuguese da India, state of Portuguese India, was in fact a larger element in the Indian history than it is given credit for. Many of the coastal parts of India had come under Portuguese power within 50 years of Vasco da Gama's arrival. The Portuguese had occupied some 60 miles of coast around Goa. On the west coast, from Mumbai to Daman and Diu, to the approaches to Gujarat, they controlled a narrow tract with four important ports and hundreds of towns and villages. In the south, they had under them a chain of seaport fortresses and trading posts like Mangalore, Kannur, Cochin, and Calicut. And though their power in Malabar was not consolidated, it was enough to ensure influence or control over the local rulers who held the spice growing land. The Portuguese established further military posts and settlements on the east coast at San Tom in Chennai, and Nagapattinam in Tamil Nadu. Towards the end of the 16th century, a wealthy settlement had grown at Hooghly in West Bengal. Envoys and ambassadors were exchanged between Goa and many of the major kingdoms in India for the time. Treaties were signed between Goa and the Deccan Sultans in 1570, which were regularly renewed as long as their kingdoms lasted. The Portuguese always had a role to play in the successive battles for the balance of power between Vijayanagara and Deccan Sultans, between the Deccanis and Mughals, and between the Mughals and Marathis. Interestingly, the Portuguese, the first Europeans to come to India, were also the last to leave this land. It was 1961 before the government of India recaptured Goa, Daman and Diu from them. It was 1961 before the government of India recaptured Goa, Daman and Diu from them. Okay, next is Portuguese administration in India. The head of the administration was the viceroy who served for 3 years with its with his secretary, and in later years a council. Next in importance came the Vedor da Fazenda, responsible for revenues and cargoes and dispatch of fleets. The fortresses from Africa to China were under captains assisted by factors, those who power was whose power was increased by the difficulties of communication and was too often used by the used for space personal ends. Okay, next one is religious policy of the Portuguese. Religious policy of the Portuguese. The Moors were the bitter enemies of Portuguese in North Africa. So were the Arabs. Arriving in the East, the Portuguese brought with them the same zeal to promote Christianity and the wish to persecute all okay, sorry. Arriving in the East, the Portuguese brought with them the same zeal to promote Christianity and the wish to persecute all Muslims. Intolerant towards the Muslims, the Portuguese were initially quite tolerant towards the Muslims. The Portuguese were initially quite tolerant towards the houses, towards the Hindus. Sorry, intolerant towards the Muslims. The Portuguese were initially quite tolerant towards the Hindus. However, over time, after the introduction of inquisition in Goa, there was a charge change and Hindus were also persecuted. Okay. Religious policy of the Portuguese. The Moors were the Moors were the bitter enemies of the Portuguese in North Africa. Intolerant towards the Muslims, the Portuguese were initially quite tolerant towards the East Hindus. However, over time, after the introduction of the Inquisition in Goa, there was a change, and Hindus were also persecuted. But in spite of this intolerant behavior, the But in spite of this intolerant behavior, the Jesuits made a good impression. But in spite of his this intolerant behavior, the Jesuits made a good impression at the court of Akbar, mainly due to the Mughal emperor's interest in questions of theology. In September 1579, Akbar forwarded a letter to the authorities at Goa requesting them to send two learned priests. The church authorities in Goa eagerly accepted the invitation. But in spite of this intolerant behavior, the Jesuits made a good impression at the court of Akbar, mainly due to the Mughal emperor's interest in questions of theology. In September 1579, Akbar forwarded a letter to the authorities at Goa requesting them to send two learned priests. The church authorities in Goa eagerly accepted the invitation, it in a seeing in it a chance to convert the emperor to Christianity, and with him his court and people. Jesuit fathers Rodolfo Acquaviva and Antonio Monserrate were selected for the purpose. Jesuit fathers Rodolfo Acquaviva and Antonio Monserrate were selected for the purpose. When they reached Fatehpur Sikri on February 28, 1580, they were received with honor. Aquaviva and Monserrate went back in 1583, belying the hopes the Portuguese entertained of Akbar's conversion to Christian faith. The second mission called by Akbar in 1590 also ended on a similar note in 1592. The third person, again invited by Akbar, arrived in 1595. at Lahore, where the court was then residing, and continued as a sort of permanent institution, thereby extending its influence on secular politics. Fathers Jerome Xavier and Emmanuel Pinheiro were the leaders of the mission, and their letters from the court became very widely known for the information they provided on the later part of Akbar's reign. Prince Salim, on ascending the throne as Jahangir, assuaged the Muslims by neglecting the Jesuit fathers. Gradually, however, his temporary estrangement from the Jesuits ended, and in 1606 he renewed his favors to them. The elegant and spacious church at Lahore was allowed to be retained by them along with the collegium or the priest residence. In 1608, a number of baptisms were carried out in Agra, the priests publicly acting with as much liberty as in Portugal. Jahangir's conduct was such that the Jesuit priests became hopeful to bringing him within the Christian hold. Jahangir's code was such that the Jesuit priest became hopeful of bringing him with the Christian fold. However, these hopes were belied. Moreover, arrogant actions on the part of the Portuguese viceroys created a rift with the Mughal emperor. Next is Portuguese laws favor with the Mughals. In 1608, Captain William Hawkins, with his ship Hector, reached Surat. In 1608, Captain William Hawkins, with his ship Hector, reached Surat. She brought with him a letter from James I, King of England, to the Mughal court of Jahangir, requesting permission to do business in India. Father Pinheiro and the Portuguese authorities did their best to prevent Hawkins from reaching the Mughal court, but they did not succeed. Jahangir accepted the gifts Hawkins brought for him and gave Hawkins a very Portuguese laws favor with the Mughals. In 1608, Captain William Hawkins, with his ship Hector, reached Surat. He brought with him a letter from James I, King of England, to the Mughal court of Jahangir, requesting permissions to do business in India. Father Pinheiro and Portuguese authorities did their best to prevent Hawkins from reaching the Mughal court, but they did not succeed. Jahangir accepted the gifts Hawkins brought for him and gave Hawkins a very favorable reception in 1609. As Hawkins knew the Turki language well, he conversed with the emperor in that language without the aid of an interpreter. Pleased with Hawkins, Jahangir appointed his as a Mansabdar for Pleased with Hawkins, Jahangir appointed him as a Mansabdar of 400 at a salary of 30,000. Apparently, he never received it. Hawkins also married women. Hawkins was also married to the daughter of American Christian named Mubarak Shah. The grant of trading facilities to the English offended the Portuguese. The grant of trading facilities to the English offended the Portuguese. The grant of trading facilities to the English offended the Portuguese. However, after negotiations, a truce was established between the Portuguese and the Mughal emperor. Portuguese stopped the English ships from entering the port of Surat. A baffled Hawkins left the Mughal court in 1611, unable to counter the Portuguese intrigues or check the vacillating Mughal policies. However, in November 1612, the English ship Dragon under Captain Best, along with little ship the Oceander, successfully fought a Portuguese fleet. Jahangir, who had no navy worth its name, learned of the English success and was greatly impressed. The Portuguese acts of piracy also resulted in conflict with the imperial Mughal government. In 1613, Portuguese offended Jahangir by capturing Mughal ships, imprisoning many Muslims, and plundering the cargoes. An enraged Jahangir ordered Mukarrab Khan. Enraged Jahangir ordered Mukarrab Khan, who was the then in charge of Surat, to obtain compensation. However, it was during the reign of Shah Jahan that the advantages which the Portuguese enjoyed in Mughal court were lost forever. Also lost were the hopes of converting the royal family and Mughal India to Christianity, a hope that Portuguese held because of the welcome accorded to them and their religion by Akbar and Jahangir. Okay, next is capture of Hooghly. Capture of Hooghly. On the basis of a imperial firman circa 1579, Portuguese had settled down on a river bank which was a short distance from Satgawon in Bengal to carry on their trading activities. Over the years, they strengthened their position by constructing big buildings, which led to the migration of the trade from Satgawon to the new port known as Hooghly. They monopolized the manufacture of salt, built a custom house of their own, started enforcing strictly the levy of duty on tobacco, which had become an important article of trade since its introduction at the beginning of the 17th century. The Portuguese not only made money as traders but also started cruel slave trade by purchasing or seizing Hindu and Muslim children whom they brought up as Christians. In the course of their nefarious activities, they seized two slave girls of Mundas Mahal. On June 24, 1632, the Mughal siege of Hooghly began, ending it in its capture 3 months later. Shah Jahan ordered the Bengal governor Qasim Khan to take action against the Portuguese. The siege of Hooghly finally led to the Portuguese fleeing. The Mughals suffered a loss of 1,000 men, but also took 400 prisoners to Agra. The prisoners were offered the option to convert to Islam or become slaves. The persecution of Christians continued for some time, after which it died down gradually. Next is decline of the Portuguese. By the 18th century, the Portuguese in India lost their commercial influence, though some of them still carried on trade in their individual capacity, and many took to piracy and robbery. In fact, Hooghly was used by some Portuguese as a base for piracy in the Bay of Bengal. The decline of the Portuguese was brought about by several factors. The local advantages gained by the Portuguese in India were reduced with the emergence of powerful dynasties in Egypt, Persia, and North India, and the rise of turbulent Marathas. as their immediate neighbors. The Marathas captured Salcete and Bassein in 1739 from the Portuguese. The Marathas captured Salcete and Bassein in 1739 from the Portuguese. The religious policies of Portuguese, such as the activities of the Jesuits, gave rise to political fears. Their antagonism for the Muslims apart, the Portuguese policy of conversion to Christianity made Hindus also resentful. Their dishonest trade practices also evoked a strong reaction. The Portuguese earned notoriety as Sri pirates. Their arrogance and violence brought them the animosity of the rulers of small states and the imperial Mughals as well. The discovery of Brazil diverted colonizing activities of Portugal to the west. The union of the two kingdoms of Spain and Portugal in 1580 to 1581, dragging the smaller kingdom into Spain's wars with England and Holland, badly affected Portuguese monopoly of trade in India. Okay. The Portuguese entered India with the sword in one hand and the crucifix in the other. Finding much gold, they laid aside the crucifix to fill their pockets, and not being able to hold them up with one hand. They were grown so heavy, they dropped the sword too. Being found in this posture, by those who came after, they were easily overcome. Alfonso de Sousa, the Portuguese governor in India, 1542 to 45. Okay. The earlier monopoly of knowledge of the sea route to India held by the Portuguese could not remain a secret forever. Soon enough, the Dutch and the English, who were learning the skills of ocean navigation, also learned of it. As new trading communities from Europe arrived in India, there began a fierce rivalry among them. In this struggle, the Portuguese had to give way to the more powerful and enterprising competitors. The Dutch and the English had greater resources and more compulsions to expand overseas, and they overcame the Portuguese resistance. One by one, Portuguese possessions fell to its opponents. Goa, which remained with the Portuguese, had lost its importance as a port after the fall of Vijayanagara Empire, and soon it did not matter in whose possession it was. The spice trade came under the control of Dutch, and Goa was superseded by Brazil as the economic center of the overseas empire of Portugal. In 1683, after two naval assaults, Marathas invaded Goa. Okay. Portuguese rise and fall. In 1498, arrival of Vasco da Gama at Calicut and his grand reception by the local king Zamorin. In 1503, establishment of the first Portuguese fort at Cochin. സോ ആദ്യത്തെ പോർച്ചുഗീസ് ഫോർട്ട് കൊച്ചിയിലാണ് എസ്റ്റാബ്ലിഷ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളത്, അതും 1503 1503 ഓക്കെ. 1505 എസ്റ്റാബ്ലിഷ്മെന്റ് ഓഫ് ദി സെക്കൻഡ് പോർച്ചുഗീസ് ഫോർട്ട് അറ്റ് കണ്ണൂർ. ഓക്കെ. 1509 defeat of the combined fleet of Gujarat, Egypt and Zamorin by Portuguese governor Francisco Almeida. 1510 Alfonso Albuquerque, the Portuguese governor, captures Goa from Bijapur. 1530, declaration of Goa as the Portuguese capital. 1535, subjugation of Diu. 1559, the Portuguese capture Daman. 1596, ouster of the Portuguese by the Dutch from Southeast Asia. 1612, loss of Surat to the English. 1663, the Dutch win all Portuguese forts on the Malabar coast to oust the Portuguese. Okay. Significance of the Portuguese. Most historians have observed that the coming of the Portuguese not only initiated what might be called the European era, but it marked the emergence of naval power. The Cholas, among others, had been a naval power, but it was now for the first time a foreign power had come to India by way of the sea. Portuguese ships carried cannon, and this was the first step in gaining monopoly over trade with the threat or actual use of force. Portuguese declared their intention to abide no rules except their own, and they were intent on getting a decisive advantage over the Indians and over the Indian Ocean trading system. In the Malabar of the 16th century, the Portuguese showed military innovation in their use of body armor, matchlock men, and guns landed from the ships. The Portuguese may have contributed by example to the Mughal use of field guns and artillery of stirrup. Artillery of the stirrup. However, an important military contribution made by the Portuguese onshore was the system of drilling groups of infantry on the Spanish model, introduced in the 1630s as a counter to the Dutch pressure. The practice was adopted first by French and English, and later taken up by the Marathas and Sikhs. And such armies of sepoys became new tools of empire in India. The Portuguese were masters of improved techniques at sea. Their multi-decked ships were heavily constructed, designed as they were to ride out Atlantic gales rather than run before the regular monsoons. This permitted them to carry a heavier armament. The use of castled prow and stern was a noteworthy method by which to repel or launch boarding parties. Indian builders adapted both to their own use. However, the Portuguese skill at organization, as in the creation of royal arsenals and dockyards, and the maintenance of a regular system of pilots and mapping and pitting state forces against private merchant shipping was even more noteworthy. The Mughals and Marathas may certainly have learned from the Portuguese, but the more certain heirs of this knowledge were the other Europeans, especially the Dutch and English in Asia. In India, the memory of religious persecution and cruelty detracts from the other contributions made by the Portuguese in the cultural field. However, it cannot be forgotten that the missionaries and church were also teachers and patrons in India of the arts of painter, carver, and sculpture. As in music, they were the interpreters not just of Portuguese but of European art to India. The art of the silversmith and goldsmith flourished in Goa, and the place became a center of elaborate filigree work, fretted foliage work, and metal work embedding jewels. However, though the interior of churches built under the Portuguese had plenty of woodwork and sculpture and sometimes painted ceilings, they are generally simple in their architectural plan. Okay, next we will discuss about the Dutch. Commercial enterprises led to the Dutch to undertake voyages to the east. Cornelis de Houtman was the first Dutchman to reach Sumatra and Bandam in 1596. In 1602, the States General of the Netherlands amalgamated many trading companies into the East India Company of Netherlands. This company was also empowered to carry on a war, to conclude treaties, to take possession of territory, and to erect fortress. Dutch settlements. After their arrival in India, Dutch founded their first factory in Masulipatanam. Masulipatanam is in Andhra Pradesh. So Portuguese first factory was in Kochi, which we have learned earlier. Yeah. So sorry, it was not factory; it was the fort. In 1503, establishment of the first Portuguese fort at Cochin. Second Portuguese fort at Kannur. Okay. Okay. The first first factory of Dutch was in Masulipatanam. and in Andhra Pradesh in 1605. They went on to establish trading centers in different parts of India and thus became a threat to the Portuguese. They captured Nagapattam near Madras, Chennai, from the Portuguese and made it their stronghold in South India. The Dutch established factories on the Coromandel coast in Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, Bengal, and Bihar. In 1609, they opened a factory in Pulicat, north of Madras. Their other principal factories in India were at Surat, 1616, Bimlipattam, 1641, Karaikal 1645, Chinsura 1653, Baranagar, Kasim Bazar near Murshidabad, Balasore, Patna, Nagapattam 1658, and Cochin 1663. So, which are they? Uh, in Coromandel Coast in Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, Bengal, Bihar, Pulikkad north of Madras, Surat, Bemlipattam, Karaikal, Chinsura, Baranagar, Kasim Bazar near Murshidabad, Balasore, Patna, Nagapattam, and Cochin. Participating in the redistributive or carrying trade, they took to the islands of Far East various articles and merchandise from India. They carried indigo manufactured in the Yamuna Valley and central India, textiles and silk from Bengal, Gujarat and the Coromandel, saltpeter from Bihar, and opium and rice from the Ganga Valley. Next is Anglo-Dutch rivalry. English were also at this time rising to prominence in the Eastern trade, and this posed a serious challenge to the commercial interests of the Dutch. Commercial rivalry soon turned into bloody warfare. The climax of the enmity between the Dutch and the English in the East was reached at Amboina, a place in present-day Indonesia, which the Dutch had captured from the Portuguese in 1605, where they massacred 10 Englishmen and 9 Japanese in 1623. This incident further intensified the rivalry between the two European companies. After prolonged warfare, both the parties came to a compromise in 1667, by which the British agreed to withdraw all their claims on Indonesia, and the Dutch retired from India to concentrate on their more profitable trade in Indonesia. They monopolized the trade in black pepper and spices, the most important Indian commodities the Dutch traded in were silk, cotton, indigo, rice, and opium. Decline of the Dutch in India. The Dutch got drawn to the Dutch got drawn into the trade of Malay archipelago. Further, in the Third Anglo-Dutch War, 1672 to 1674, communications between Surat and New English settlement of Bombay got cut, due to which 3 homebound English ships were captured in the Bay of Bengal by the Dutch forces. The retaliation by the English resulted in the defeat of the Dutch in the Battle of Hooghly, which happened in November 1759, which dealt a crushing blow to Dutch ambitions in India. The Dutch were not much interested in empire building in India. Their concerns were trade. In any case, their main commercial interest lay in the Spice Island of Indonesia, from where they earned a huge profit through business. Okay. The Dutch rivalry with English during the 17th century was more bitter than that of Portuguese. The policy of the Dutch in the East was influenced by two motives. One was to take revenge on Catholic Spain, the foe of their independence, and her ally Portugal, and the other was to colonize and establish settlements in the East Indies with a view to monopolizing commerce in that region. They gained their first object by the gradual decline of Portuguese influence. The realization of their second object brought them into bitter competition with the English. Okay. The English Charter of Queen Elizabeth I. Francis Drake's voyage around the world in 1580 and the English victory over the Spanish Armada in 1588 generated a new sense of enterprise in the British, encouraging sailors to venture out to the east. As the knowledge grew of the high profits earned by the Portuguese in Eastern trade, English traders too wanted a share. So in 1599, a group of English merchants calling themselves the Merchant Adventurers formed a company. On December 31, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I issued a charter with rights of exclusive trading to the company, named the Governor and Company of Merchants of London, trading into East Indies. Initially, a monopoly of 15 years was granted, in which in May 1609 was extended indefinitely by a fresh charter. As the Dutch were already concentrating more on the East Indies, the English turned to India in search of textiles and other commodities of trade. Progress of the English Company, foothold in West and South. Captain Hawkins arrived in the court of Jahangir in April 1609. Captain Hawkins arrived in the court of Jahangir in April 1609 itself. 1609. But the mission is to establish factory at Surat did not succeed due to opposition from the Portuguese, and Hawkins left Agra in 1611 November. In 1611, the English started trading at Masulipatanam on the southeastern coast of India and later established a factory there in 1616. So English established a factory in Masulipatanam in 1616. It was in 1612 that Captain Thomas Best defeated the Portuguese in the Sea of Surat. An impressed Jahangir granted permission to the English in early 1613 to establish a factory at Surat under the Thomas Aldworth. In 1615, Sir Thomas Roe came as an accredited ambassador of James I to the court of Jahangir, staying on there till February 1619. Though he was unsuccessful in concluding a commercial treaty with the Mughal emperor, he was able to secure a number of privileges, including permission to set up factories at Agra, Ahmedabad, and Broch. Sir Thomas Roe. Okay. The English company did not have a smooth progress. It had to contend with the Portuguese and the Dutch in the beginning. But the changing situation helped them and turned things in their favor. Bombay had been gifted to King Charles II by the King of Portugal as dowry when Charles married the Portuguese princess Catherine in 1662. Bombay was given over to the East India Company on an annual payment of £10 only in 1668. Later, Bombay was made the headquarters by shifting the seat of Western Presidency from Surat to Bombay in 1687. So there was a tacit peace between the English and the Portuguese now. There was also Anglo-Dutch compromise, as mentioned earlier, by which the Dutch agreed not to interfere with the British English company's trade in India. Thus, the English were rid of two arch rivals in India. Okay, the English company's position was improved by the Golden Firman issued to them by Sultan of Golconda in 1632. On a payment of 500 pagodas a year, they earned the privilege of trading freely in the ports of Golconda. A member of the Masulipatanam Council, the British merchant Francis Day, in 1639, received from the ruler of Chandragiri permission to build a fortified factory at Madras, which later became the Fort St. George and replaced Masulipatanam as the headquarters of the English settlements in South India. Thereafter, the English extended their trading activities to the east and started factories at Hariharpur in the Mahanadi Delta and at Balasore in Odisha in 1633. foothold in Bengal. Bengal was then a large and rich province in India, advanced in trade and commerce. Commercial and political control over Bengal naturally appeared as an attractive proposition to the profit-seeking English merchants. Bengal was also an important province of the Mughal emperor. Shah Shuja, the Subedar or governor of Bengal, in 1651 allowed the English to trade in Bengal in return for an annual payment of Rs 3,000 in lieu of all duties. Factories in Bengal were started at Hooghly, 1651, and other places like Kasim Bazar, Patna, and Rajmahal. Nevertheless, despite the privileges of farmers, the company's business was now and then obstructed by customs officers in the local checkposts who asked for payment of tolls. In pursuance of its changed policy, the company wanted to have a fortified settlement at Hooghly so that force could be used if necessary. William Hedges, the first agent and governor of the company in Bengal, appealed to Shaista Khan, the Mughal governor of Bengal, in August 1682 for redressal of the grievance. As nothing came out of the appeal, hostilities broke out between the English and the Mughals. 4 years later, Hooghly was sacked by the Imperial Mughals in October 1686. The English retaliated by capturing the imperial forts at Thana, modern Garden Reach, raiding Hijli in East Midnapur, and storming the Mughal fortifications at Balasore. However, the English were forced to leave Hooghly and were sent to an unhealthy location at the mouth of River Ganga. After the Mughal raid on Hooghly, Job Charnock, a company agent, started negotiations with the Mughals so as to return to a place called Sudanudi. Charnock signed a treaty with the Mughals in February 1690 and returned to Sudanudi in August 1690. Thus, an English factory was established on February 10, 1691, the day an imperial firman was issued, permitting the English to continue contentedly their trade in Bengal on payment of Rs 3,000 a year in lieu of all dues. A zamindar in Bardhaman district, Shobha Singh, rebelled, subsequently giving the English the pretext they were looking for to fortify their settlement at Sudanudi in 1696. In 1698, the English succeeded in getting the permission to buy the zamindari of the three villages of Sudanudi, Gobindapur, and Calicut from their owners on payment of Rs 1200. The fortified settlement was named Fort William in the year 1700, when it also became the seat of Eastern Presidency, Calcutta, with Sir Charles Eyre as its first president. Okay, Farrukhsiyar's ferments. Farrukhsiyar's ferments. In 1715, an English mission led by John Serman to the court of the Mughal Emperor Farrukhsiyar secured three famous ferments. Who secured? John Serman. John Serman. Okay, Mughal from the Emperor Farrukhsiyar. Okay, secured three famous ferments, giving the company many valuable privileges in Bengal, Gujarat, and Hyderabad. The ferments thus obtained were regarded as the Magna Carta of the company. Their important terms were: in Bengal, the company's imports and exports were exempted from additional custom duties, excepting annual payment of Rs 3,000 rupees as settled earlier. Company was permitted to issue dastaks passes for the transportation of such goods. Company was permitted to rent more lands around Calcutta. In Hyderabad, company retained its existing privilege of freedom from duties in trade and had to pay prevailing rent only for Madras. In Surat, for an annual payment of 10,000 rupees, East India Company was exempted from levy of all duties. It was decreed that the coins of the company minted at Bombay were to have currency throughout the Mughal Empire. Apparently, the English East India Company managed to earn a number of trading concessions in Bengal from the Mughal authority by means of flattery and diplomacy. But the English had to vanquish the French before they could be rid of competitors and establish their complete sway over India. Okay. Formative years of the East India Company, 1600. The East India Company is established. 1609, William Hawkins arrives at Jahangir's court. 1611, Captain Middleton obtains the permission of the Mughal governor of Surat to trade there. 1613, a permanent factory of East India Company is established at Surat. 1615, Sir Thomas Roe, the ambassador of King James I, arrives at Jahangir's court. In 1618, the ambassador succeeds in obtaining two firmans, one each from the emperor and Prince Guram, confirming free trade with exemption from inland tolls. 1616, the company establishes its first factory in south in Masulipatanam. Okay. 1632, the company gets the golden firman from the Sultan of Golconda, ensuring safety and prosperity of their trade. 1633, company establishes its first factory in East India, in Hariharpur, Balasore, Odisha. 1639, company gets the lease of Madras from a local king. 1651, company is given permission to trade at Hooghly, Bengal. 1662, British King Charles II is given Bombay as dowry for marrying a Portuguese princess, Catherine of Braganza. 1667, Aurangzeb gives the English a firman for trade in Bengal. 1691, company gets the imperial order to continue their trade in Bengal in lieu of payment of Rs 3,000 a year. 1717, Mughal Emperor Farooq Siyar issues a firman called the Magna Carta of the company, giving the company a large number of trade concessions. Okay. Next is merging of two English companies. After the English Revolution of 1688, the Whigs, which with their enhanced influence, opposed the monopoly of the East India Company. Thus, a rival company was formed with which deputed Sir William Norris as its ambassador to the court of Aurangzeb. January 1701 to April 1702 to gain trading privileges for itself. The new company, however, provided a failure. Under pressure from the Crown and the Parliament, the two companies were amalgamated in 1708 under the title of United Company of Merchants of England Trading to the East Indies. This was the East India Company from 1708 to 1873, which was to establish British political power in India. Okay, next is the French. Next, we will discuss about the French, foundation of French centers in India. Although the French harbored a wish to engage in the commerce of the East since the opening years of the 16th century, their appearance on the Indian coasts was late. Indeed, the French were the last Europeans to come to India with the purpose of trade. During the reign of Louis XIV, the king's famous minister Colbert laid the foundation of the Compagnie des Indes Orientales, Compagnie des Indes Orientales, French East India Company in 1664, in which the king also took a deep interest. The Compagnie des Indes Orientales was granted a 50-year monopoly on French trade in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The French king also granted the company a concession in perpetuity for the island of Madagascar, as well as any other territories it could conquer. The company spent a lot of its money and resources in trying to revive the colonies of Madagascar, but without any success. Then in 1667, Francois Madagascar, then in 1667, Francois Caron headed an expedition to India, setting up a factory in Surat. Mercara, a Persian who accompanied Caron, founded another French factory in Masulipatanam in 1669 after obtaining a patent from the Sultan of Golconda. In 1673, The French obtained permission from Shaista Khan, the Mughal Subedar of Bengal, to establish a township at Chandler Nagore near Calcutta. Pondicherry, new center of the French power in India. In 1673, Sher Khan Lodi, governor of Valikondapuram, under the Bijapur Sultan, granted Francois Martin, the the director of the Masilepatnam factory, a site for a settlement. Pondicherry was founded in 1674. In the same year, Francois Martin replaced Caron as the French governor. The French company established its factories in other parts of India also, particularly in coastal regions. Coastal regions. Mahi, Karaikal, Balasore, and Qasim Bazar were a few important trading centers of the French East India Company. After taking charge of Pondicherry in 1674, Francois Martin developed it as a place of importance. It was indeed the stronghold of the Portuguese in India. Early setbacks of the French East India Company, the French position in India was badly affected with the outbreak of war between the Dutch and the French. Bolstered by their alliance with the English since the Revolution of 1688, Dutch captured Pondicherry in 1693. Although Treaty of Ryswick concluded in September 1697 restored Pondicherry to the French. The Dutch garrison held on it for 2 more years. Once again, under Francois Martin's able guidance, Pondicherry flourished and turned out to be the most important settlement of the French in India. Again, there was a bad turn in the fortunes of French company in India when War of Spanish Succession broke out in Europe. Consequent to this, they had to abandon their factories at Surat, Masulipatanam, and Bandam in the early 18th century. The French in India had another setback when Francois Martin died on December 31, 1706. Reorganization of the French company. In 1720, the French company was reorganized as the Perpetual Company of the Indies, which revived its strength. This was further enhanced by the stewardship of two active and wise governors, Linoir and Dumas, between 1720 and 1742. Further, the French India was backed by the French possession of Mauritius and reunion in the southern Indian Ocean. Okay, the Anglo-French struggle for supremacy, the Carnatic Wars, background of the rivalry. Though the British and French came to India for trading purposes, they were ultimately drawn into politics of India. Both had visions of establishing political power over the region. The Anglo-French rivalry in India reflected the traditional rivalry of England and France throughout their histories. It began with the outbreak of the Austrian War of Succession and ended with the conclusion of the 7 Years' War. Specifically in India, the rivalry in the form of 3 Carnatic Wars decided once for all that the English and not the French were to become the masters of India. In 1740, the political situation in South India was uncertain and confused. Nizam Asaf Jah of Hyderabad was old and fully engaged in battling the Marathas in the western Deccan, while his subordinates were speculating upon the consequences of his death. To the south of his kingdom lay the Coromandel coast, without any strong ruler to maintain a balance of power. Instead, there was the remnant of old Vijayanagara Empire in interior Mysore, Cochin, and Travancore on the Malabar coast, and in the east, the small states of Mathura, Tanjavur, and Tiruchirappalli. Okay, the decline of Hyderabad was a signal for the end of Muslim expansionism, and English adventurers got their plans ready. Also, there was the Maratha kingdom of Tanjavur providing the Peshwa of Pune an excuse for interference whenever he pleased. First Carnatic War, which happened in 1740 to 48, 1740 to 1748. Background: Carnatic War was the name given by the Europeans to the Coromandel Coast and its hinterland. The First Carnatic War was an extension of Anglo-French War in Europe, which was caused by the Austrian War of Succession. Immediate cause. What was the immediate cause for First War Carnatic War, which happened in 1740 to 48? Let's look into it. Immediate cause. Although France, conscious of its relatively weaker position in India, did not favor an extension of hostilities to India. The English Navy under Barnett seized some French ships to provoke France. France retaliated by seizing Madras in 1746 with the help of fleet from Mauritius, the Isle of France, under the Admiral La Bourdonnaise, the French governor of Mauritius. Thus began the First Carnatic War. Result: the First Carnatic War ended in 1748 when the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. First Carnatic War in the treaty ഏതായിരുന്നു? Aix-la-Chapelle. So the First Carnatic War ended in 1748 when the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle was signed, bringing the Austrian War of Succession to a conclusion. Under the terms of this treaty, Madras was handed back to the English, and the French in turn got their territories in North America. Significance: the First Carnatic War is remembered for the Battle of Saint-Thome in Madras, fought between the French forces and the forces of Anwaruddin, the Nawab of Carnatic, to whom the English appealed for help. A small French army under Captain Paradis defeated the strong Indian army under Mahfouz Khan at Saint-Thome on the banks of River Adayar. This was an eye-opener for Europeans in India. It revealed that even a small disciplined army could easily defeat a much larger Indian army. Further, this war adequately brought out the importance of naval force in the Anglo-French conflict in Deccan. Second Carnatic War, which happened in 1749 to 1754. 1749 to 1754. Background. The background for the Second Carnatic War was provided by rivalry in India. Dupleix, the first governor who had successfully led the French forces in First Carnatic War, sought to increase his power and French political influence in southern India by interfering in local dynastic disputes to defeat the English. Immediate cause: the opportunity was provided by the death of Nizamul Mulk, the founder of independent kingdom of Hyderabad in 1748, and the release of Chanda Sahib, the son-in-law of Dost Ali, the Nawab of Carnatic, by the Marathas in the same year. The accession of Nasir Jung, the son of Nizam, to the throne of Hyderabad was opposed by Muzaffar Jung, this grandson of Nizam, who laid claim to the throne, saying that Mughal emperor had appointed him as the governor of Hyderabad. In the Carnatic, the appointment of Anwaruddin Khan as the Nawab was resented by Chanda Sahib. French supported the claims of Muzaffar Jung and Chanda Sahib. FMC. French supported the claims of Muzaffar Jung and Chanda Sahib in the Deccan and Carnatic respectively, while English sided with Nasir Jung and Anwaruddin. ENA. English, Nasir Jung and Anwaruddin. Okay, course of the war. The combined armies of Muzaffar Jung, Chanda Sahib, and French defeated and killed Anwaruddin at the Battle of Ambur near Vellore in 1749. Muzaffar Jung became the Subedar of Deccan, and Dupleix was appointed governor of all Mughal territories to the south of the river Krishna. A French army under Bussy was stationed at Hyderabad to secure French interests there. Territories near Pondicherry and also some areas on Orissa coast, including Masilepatanam, were ceded to the French. Having failed to provide effective assistance to Muhammad Ali at Trichinopoli, Robert Clive, then an agent factor of the English Company, put forward the proposal for a diversionary attack on the governor of Madras, Saunders. He suggested a sudden raid on Arcot, the capital of the Carnatic, so as to relieve the pressure on Trichinopoli. He reasoned that in such an event, Chanda Sahib would rush to save his capital. Thus, in August 1751, with only a force of 210 men, Robert Clive attacked and captured Arcot. As extended, Chanda Sahib hastened to his capital, taking a force of 4,000 men from Trichinopoly, but failed to get back the fort even after a siege of 53 days from September 23 to November 14. Now Mysore, Tanjavur, and Maratha chief Morari Rao came to the aid of Trichinopoly and the Clive and Stranger Lawrence and of Clive and Stranger Lawrence. Trichinopoly was first relieved of its siege, while general law of France with Chanda Sahib remained cooped up in the island of Sri Rangam. They were forced to surrender in June 1752 when Muhammad Ali executed Chanda Sahib, the British failing to interfere. Rise and fall of Rise and fall of Dupleix in India. Joseph Francis Dupleix, born in 1697, was the son of a wealthy farmer general of taxes and director general of the Company of the Indies. He got a high post at Pondicherry in 1720, allegedly on the basis of influence of his father. At Pondicherry, he made a lot of money by private trade, which was then permitted to servants of the French company. In December 1726, he was suspended owing to drastic change in the constitution of the French company and some confusions arising out of that. In 1730, Dupleix won his case and was appointed as the governor of Chandarnagore as compensation. In 1741, he was appointed as the Director General of French colonies in India. Later, he was conferred the title of Nawab by Mughal Emperor and Subedar of Deccan Muzaffar Jung. According to historians, Dupleix possessed qualities of an administrator, a diplomat, and a leader besides having political insight with a broad vision. Dupleix in the role of administrator. In 1741, Dupleix became the Governor General of Pondicherry. He found Pondicherry facing several problems: Maratha invasion, famine, uncultivated land, and chaotic condition in the Carnatic. Apart from this, the directors of the company sought a drastic cut in expenditure of the French East India Company, owing to the priority given to the French colonies in North America. So Dupleix reduced public expenditure despite opposition from his council and balanced income and expenditure, coupled with a cut on salaries of officers. However, he decided to disobey the directors on the matter of fortification of settlements. He enhanced the defenses of Pondicherry, even spending a large sum from his personal wealth. He made Pondicherry the emporium of commerce in South India by taking practical steps to develop the trade of the colony. Later, the directors of the company praised Dupleix for taking the right decisions even in contradiction of the directors. Dupleix as the master of diplomacy. The analysis of the first two Carnatic Wars proves the diplomacy of Dupleix as a leader who visualized the path of European conquest of India. Dupleix used the Nawab of Carnatic to forbid the English from waging war in his territories so that French settlements at Pondicherry could be protected till the French forces acquired enough strength. In return, Nawab was promised Madras after the English got defeated, but Dupleix, using his diplomacy, did not give Madras to the Nawab, and he even defeated him at Saint Thom, 1746. Dupleix convinced Admiral La Bourdonnais to break promises made to the English, citing examples from history that promises made under certain circumstances were never binding. Further, he said that since the position of the Governor General was superior to that of the Commander of the Navy, the combat entered into between the latter and the English was ultra vires. Thus, he was able to convince his subordinate to do what was considered unethical in general terms, but best suited for one's nation. Dupleix was the first European to interfere in internal politics of the Indian rulers. He supported Muzaffar Jung for Hyderabad and Chanda Sahib for Carnatic. He supported Muzaffar Jung for Hyderabad and Chanda Sahib for Carnatic, and his candidates emerged successful and in return gave great concessions to Dupleix. Dupleix was in fact the originator of the practice of subsidiary alliance in India. He placed a French army at Hyderabad at the expense of Subedar. Why Dupleix failed in India? Dupleix was recalled in 1754 due to the initial defeat of the French army in the Second Carnatic War and the heavy cost incurred by the company due to Dupleix's political decisions. Many historians have called the recall of Dupleix by the directors as a blunder, as a result of a compromise between France and England over issues in America. However, there was some weaknesses in Dupleix also, which can put in brief as follows. Dupleix suffered from an over sanguine temperament. He hoped too often for too long, thus losing the advantage in critical situations. The peers of Dupleix did not like his autocratic behavior and on many occasions quarreled with him on this matter. Dupleix was not a man of action. He planned a campaign, directed his lieutenants, but never led an army in the battlefield like Lawrence or Clive. The French failed to capture Trichinopoli because the schemes thought out by Dupleix could not be turned into action by his commanders. Result: the French authorities, annoyed at the heavy financial losses that Dupleix policy involved, decided to recall him in 1754. Godeheu succeeded Dupleix as French Governor General in India. Godeheu adopted a policy of negotiations with the English and concluded a treaty with them. The English and French agreed not to interfere the quarrels of native princes. Also, each party was left in possession of the territories actually occupied by them at the time of the treaty. According to historians, the fear of serious repercussions in America prompted the French to suspend hostilities in India. Okay. The struggle between Dupleix and Clive in India, the defense of Arcot, and the deeds which led to the founding of our Indian Empire, all these events were part of desperate struggle for supremacy between England and France. J.R. Seeley. We may regard Dupleix as the most striking figure in the short Indian episode of that long and arduous contest for transmarine dominion, which was fought out between France and England in the 18th century. Although it was far beyond his power to influence the ultimate destiny of either nation in India, and although the result of his plans was that we accomplished for ourselves against the French exactly everything that the French intended to accomplish for themselves against us, Clive. It is certain, moreover, that the conception of an Indian Empire had already been formed by others besides Dupleix, and that more than one clear-headed observer had perceived how easily the whole country might be subdued by an European power. Alfred Lair. Okay. Implications. It became evident that the countenance of Indian authority was no longer necessary for European success. Rather, Indian authority itself was becoming dependent on European support. Muhammad Ali in the Carnatic and Salabat Jung in Hyderabad became clients rather than patrons. Third Carnatic War, 1758 to 63. 1758 to 63. Background. In Europe, when Austria wanted to recover Silesia in 1756, 7 years war, which happened in 1756 and lasted till 1763. Okay. Background in Europe, when Austria wanted to recover Silesia in 1756, the Seven Years' War started. Britain and France were once again on opposite sides. Course of war in India. In 1758, the French army under Count de Lally captured the English forts of St. David and Vizianagaram. Now the English became offensive and inflicted heavy losses on the French fleet under Admiral D.H. at Masulipatanam. Battle of Vandivash. The decisive battle of the Third Carnatic War was won by the English on January 22, 1760 at Vandivash or Vandavasi in Tamil Nadu. General Eyrecourt of the English totally routed the French army under Count Thomas Arthur T. Lally and took Bussy as prisoner. Pondicherry was gallantly defended by Lally for 8 months before he surrendered on January 16, 1761. With the loss of Ginji and Mahi, French power in India was reduced to its lowest. Lally, after being taken as a prisoner of war at London, returned to France where he was imprisoned and executed in 1766. Result and significance. The Third Carnatic War proved decisive. Although the Treaty of Peace of Paris 1673 restored to the French their factories in India, the French political influence disappeared after the war. Thereafter, the French, like their Portuguese and Dutch counterparts in India, confined themselves to their small enclaves and to commerce. The English became supreme European power in the Indian subcontinent since the Dutch had already been defeated in the Battle of Bidara in 1759. Okay. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 is usually regarded by historians as the decisive event that brought about ultimate British rule over India. However, one cannot quite ignore the view that the true turning point for control of the subcontinent was the victory of British forces over the French forces at Vandivash in 1760. The victory at Vandivash left the English East India Company with no European rival in India. Okay. View. While the English received supplies of food and money from Bengal, recruits of men from Europe, and grain from their northern settlements, the French could receive nothing but what came to them laboriously by land. The first were constantly strengthened, the second was constantly weakened. And this enabled Coote to establish his military superiority over Lally in the field and to hem him within the walls of Pondicherry. H. Dodwell, The Cambridge History of India, Volume 5. Okay, thus they were ready to take over the rule of the entire country. Significantly, in the Battle of Vandivash, natives served in both the armies as sepoys. It makes one think, irrespective of which side won, there was an inevitability about the fall of India to European invaders. There was a lack of sensitivity to geopolitics of the day as well as a lack of foresight on the part of native rulers. Causes for the English success and French failure. The English company was a private enterprise. This created a sense of enthusiasm and self-confidence among the people. With less governmental control over it, this company could take instant decisions when needed without waiting for the approval of the government. The French company, on the other hand, was a state concern. It was controlled and regulated by French government and was hemmed in by government policies and delays in decision making. English Navy was superior to the French Navy. It helped to cut off the vital sea link between the French possessions in India and France. English held three important places, namely Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, whereas French had only Pondicherry. French subordinated their commercial interest to territorial ambition, which made the French company short of funds. In spite of their imperialistic motives, the British never neglected their commercial interests. So they always had the funds and consequent sound financial condition to help them significantly in the wars against their rivals. A major factor In the success of English in India was the superiority of commanders in British camp. In comparison to the long list of leaders of English side, Sir Eyre Court, Major Stringer Lawrence, Robert Clive, and many others, there was only duplex on the French side. Okay. About the goods in trade initially. There are accounts by various European travelers and traders about the activities in port towns, such as Surat, which give details of the intricate steps that went into the creation of fabrics collectively called Indian. Great demand was there for cotton long clothes, usually 35 to 50 meter in length, Salampur, staple cotton cloth, and Maurice, superior quality cotton cloth. Other much desired fabrics were the painted cloths and prints, the silks and the dyes. These textiles were not just in demand in Europe but also in other parts of Asia. Indians had traded in textiles for centuries before the Europeans arrived. In China, Japan, and Indonesian archipelago, Indian cotton was popular for its lightweight yet strong qualities. When the Dutch, English, and French acquired materials from India, it was not only for their home countries but for transport to Malacca or Java, for example, where they were traded for spices. By the 18th century, the French had colored, patterned handkerchiefs, specially woven for particular island markets, which proved a successful entrepreneurial effort. A corollary to the trade in textiles and spices was the trade in slaves. It is generally considered that slave trade concerned Europe, Africa, and America as the New World. But this ignored the fact that trade between Europe and Asia also helped to sustain slavery. French ships took European goods to Asia, where they acquired cowrie shells and Indian textiles that were highly valued in West Africa. Their traders exchanged these goods in Africa for slaves who were sent to the colonies of France in the Americas. The circle was completed, says the Yale Center for the Study of Globalization, when sugar and other goods from Americas were loaded on board and shipped back to France. When the French East India Company started trading in India, they entered an already well established complex economic system and intricate network of production, negotiation, delivery, and distribution. Large commercial fleets, as well as prosperous shore based business, were run by Indian merchants. Weavers and merchants worked with overland freight operators and brokers who worked with exporters and ship owners. These agents had also to negotiate with local state officials for commercial privileges. The European traders had to learn well established rules and practices and successfully collaborate with indigenous envoys. The factories of all European trade groups were to be found in practically the same places. At the peak of the Indian trade, the demand for Indian goods exceeded the supply by weavers and other artisans. Even so, there was no serious rivalry initially. But as the three companies, the Dutch, English, and French grew more competitive, the English better funded and better conversant in local business practices and customs, were able to expand their factory outposts to larger industrial towns under their jurisdiction. Gradually, these commercial strongholds turned into political enclaves, ultimately enabling the English to expand and consolidate their power and control all over India. Okay, next we will discuss about the Danes. The Danish East India Company was established in 1616, and in 1620 they founded a factory at Tranquebar near Tanjavur on the eastern coast of India. Their principal settlement was Serampore near Calcutta. Danes' principal settlement was at Serampore near Calcutta. The Danish factories, which were not important at any time, were sold to British government in 1845. The Danes are better known for their missionary activities than for commerce. Okay, next we will discuss why the English succeeded against other European powers. Of all the European nations who came as traders to India after new sea routes were discovered, England emerged as the most powerful and successful by the end of 18th century. The major factors which can be attributed for the success of English against other European powers, the Portugal, Netherlands, France, and Denmark, in the world in general and in India in particular, were as follows. First reason is structure and nature of the trading companies. The East India Company, formed through amalgamation of several rival companies at home, was controlled by a board of directors whose members were elected annually. The shareholders of the company exercised considerable influence, as the votes could be bought and sold through purchase of shares. The trading companies of France and Portugal were largely owned by the state, and their nature was in many ways feudalistic. In the French company, the monarch had more than 60% share, and its directors were nominated by the monarch from the shareholders, who were supposed to carry out the decisions of two high commissioners appointed by the government. The shareholders took very little interest in the promoting the prosperity of company, because the state guaranteed a dividend to the shareholders. The lack of public interest could be inferred from the fact that between 1725 and 1765, there was no meeting of the shareholders, and the company was simply managed as a department of the state. Okay, next reason is naval superiority. The Royal Navy of Britain was not only the largest, it was most advanced of its times. The victory against the Spanish Armada and against the French at Trafalgar had put the Royal Navy at the peak of European naval forces. In India too, British were able to defeat the Portuguese and French due to strong and fast movement of the naval ships. The English learned from the Portuguese the importance of an efficient navy and improved their own fleet technologically. Third reason is industrial revolution. The industrial revolution started in England in the early 18th century with the invention of new machines like the spinning jenny, steam engine, the power loom, and several others. These machines greatly improved production in the fields of textiles, metallurgy, steam powder, and agriculture. The industrial revolution reached other European nations late, and this helped England to maintain its hegemony. Fourth reason is military skill and discipline. The British soldiers were a disciplined lot and well trained. The British commanders were strategists who tried new tactics in warfare. Technological developments equipped the military well. All this combined to enable smaller groups of English fighters defeat larger armies. Fifth reason is stable government. With the exception of Glorious Revolution of 1688, Britain witnessed a stable government with efficient monarchs. Other European nations like France witnessed violent revolution in 1789 and afterwards the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleon's defeat in 1815 significantly weakened France's position, and from then on it was forced to side with Britain. The Italians got united as a nation as late in 1861. The Dutch and Spain were also involved in the 80 Years' War in the 17th century, which weakened Portuguese imperialism. The Dutch East India Company, affected by bankruptcy in 1800, coupled with the revolution in 1830, was forced to sell its possessions to Britain and quit Asia. Sixth reason is lesser zeal for religion. Britain was less zealous about religion and less interested in spreading Christianity as compared to Spain, Portugal, or the Dutch. Thus, its rule was far more acceptable to the subjects than that of other colonial powers. Next reason is use of debt market. One of the major and innovative reasons why Britain succeeded between the mid 18th century and the mid 19th century, while the other European nations fell, was that it used the debt markets to fund its wars. The world's first central bank, the Bank of England, was established to sell government debt to the money markets on the promise of a decent return on Britain's defeating rival countries like France and Spain. Britain was thus enabled to spend much more on its military than its rivals. Britain's rival France could not match the expenditure of the English. Between 1694 and 1812, first under the monarchs, then under the revolutionary governments, and finally under the Napoleon Bonaparte, France simply went bankrupt with its outdated ways of raising money. Okay, so now we will discuss the summary of this chapter, the advent of Europeans in India. Why a sea route to India? First one is the spirit of Renaissance in the 15th century Europe. Second one is European economy growing rapidly, leading to prosperity and demand for luxury goods, increasing the supply of meat, requiring spices for preservation. Third one is capture of Constantinople in 1453 and Syria and Egypt later by the Ottoman Turks, calling for a new route to reach India without dealing with Arabs and Turks. Fourth one is Venice and Geneva, too small to stand up to the Turks. Fifth one is Spain and Portugal, aided with money and men by the North Europeans and by ships and technical knowledge by the Genoese. Sixth one is the Portuguese, the pioneers, followed by Dutch, English, Danes, and French, respectively, to reach India. Okay, the Portuguese. Vasco da Gama discovered sea route to India in 1498. Vasco's second visit in 1502 led to the establishment of trading stations at Calicut, Cochin, and Kannur. Francisco de Almeida, 1505 to 1509, first governor, initiated the blue water policy, Cartesian system. Alfonso de Albuquerque, 1509 to 1515, considered to be the founder of Portuguese power in India. Albuquerque, okay. Captured Goa from Bijapur, persecuted Muslims, captured Batkal from Sri Krishna Devarai in 1510 of Vijayanagara, and initiated the policy of marrying with the natives of India and banned practice of sati in his area of influence. Okay, Ninoda Kunha, 1529 to 38, shifted the capital from Cochin to Goa in 1530. In his rule, Diu and Bassein came under the Portuguese occupation from Gujarat King Bahadur Shah. Bahadur Shah got killed in 1537 at Diu while negotiating with the Portuguese, Bahadur Shah. Okay. Factors for decline of the Portuguese in India. Emergence of powerful dynasties in Egypt, Persia, and North India, and the appearance of Marathas as neighbors. Political fears aroused by the activities of Jesuit missionaries and hatred of persecution, such as Inquisition, that caused reaction against Portuguese spiritual pressure. Rise of the English and Dutch commercial ambitions, challenging the political supremacy. Rampant corruption, greed, and selfishness, along with the piracy and clandestine trade practices of the Portuguese administration in India. Diversion of Portuguese colonizing ambitions towards the west due to the discovery of Brazil. Next is the Dutch, the United East India Company of the Netherlands. Very good. Oost Indische Combine, formed in March 1602 by the Charter of Dutch Parliament, had the powers to wage wars, make treaty, and build forts. Dutch factories in India. ഏതൊക്കെയാണ്? മസുലിപട്ടണം 1605, പുലിക്കാട്ട് 1610, സൂറത്ത് 1616, ബിംലിപട്ടണം 1641, Karikal 1645, Chinsura 1653, Kasim Bazar, Baranagore, and Patna, Balasore, Nagapattam 1658, and Cochin 1663. Decline in India. The defeat of the Dutch in Anglo-Dutch rivalry and shifting of Dutch attention towards the Malay archipelago. Fourth one is Battle of Bitara, 1759. The English defeated the Dutch. The English. Factors for foundation. Drake's voyage around the world, and English victory over the mighty Spanish Armada leading to great ambitions. Formation. English East India Company was formed on December 31, 1600 by the charter issued by Queen Elizabeth I, which gave the company monopoly to trade in East Indies for 15 years. Settlement in India with Captain Thomas Best's victory over the Portuguese 1612. The English establishment their first factory at Surat 1613. Subsequently, the Sir Thomas Roe secured permission from Jahangir to establish factories at Agra, Ahmedabad, and Broch. Bombay came under the control of company with Charles II, who received it as a part of Portuguese dowry, leasing it out to the East India English Company for an annual rent of £10. Madras with Fort St. George replaced Machilipatnam as the English headquarters on the east coast when the former was given by the Chandragiri chief to the English in 1639. The city of Calcutta grew from the development of three villages, which are the Sudanudi, Gobindapur, and Kalikatta, secured from the Mughal governor of Bengal. The fortified settlement was named Fort William, 1700, and it became the seat of British power in India till 1911. Farrukhsiyah's Firmans. In 1717, Mughal Emperor Farrukhsiyah's Firman, called the Magna Carta of East India Company, gave significant privileges to the company in Bengal, Gujarat, and Hyderabad. Merger of companies. In 1635, a rival company named Corteen Association, later called the Asada Company, formed by Sir William Corteen, was given license to trade by Charles I. In 1657, both the companies merged. In 1698, another rival company emerged. In 1702, the rivalry between the old and the new company came to an end, but their final amalgamation took place in 1708 under the title The United Company of Merchants of England Trading to the East Indies, after the arbitration of the Earl of Godolphin. This company ruled in India till 1858. The French Foundation. In 1664, Colbert, a minister of Louis XIV, laid the foundation of Compagnie des Indes Orientales. Settlement in India. Pondicherry, developed as headquarters, was granted to Francois Martin, the director of Machilipatnam factory, by Valikondapuram governor Sher Khan Lodi in 1673, finally incorporated into Indian Union in 1954. Anglo-French rivalry in India. The Anglo-French rivalry in India coincided with the wars between the English and French in Europe. Causes: for protection and expansion of commercial interests, for political developments in southern India and Europe, provided pretext to contest their claims, which culminated in three Carnatic Wars. First Carnatic War, 1740 to 48. It was an extension of the Anglo-French rivalry in Europe and ended in 1748 with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. Second Carnatic War, 1749 to 54. Although inconclusive, it undermined the French power in South India vis-a-vis the English. Third Carnatic War, 1758 to 63. A decisive war known as Battle of Vandivash, 1760 to 61. An echo of the Anglo-French struggle in Europe. By the Treaty of Paris, 1763, French were allowed to use Indian settlements for commercial purposes only, and fortification of settlements were banned. Causes of the French failure: inadequate military and financial support, France's involvement in Europe, ill-managed policy of Imperial France, lack of commercial incentive to the French company, sound commercial base of the English company. Okay, here we have completed chapter 3. In the next video, we will discuss chapter 4, India on the eve of British conquest. Okay, thank you for listening me. Okay, we'll see you in next class. Thank you very much.